very much.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn, and I call Ian Sollom.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And this evening I want to address a system that is failing thousands of families across our country, the Child Maintenance Service. And in doing so, I hope this House sends a clear message to every parent struggling with that system and every young person affected that their MPs are listening and that we are determined to act. And I'm pleased to see the Minister for Transformation responding for the government and look forward to working with him to achieve the meaningful transformation that families do desperately need. Now, before my election last July, I confess the Child Maintenance Service hadn't been on my radar as such an important issue. That changed almost immediately upon taking office as constituents came to me with their accounts of experiences with the CMS and their appeals for help. And these weren't isolated incidents or minor inconveniences. They revealed systemic failures, enforcement mechanisms that seemed to exist in name only, loopholes exploited by those seeking to evade their responsibilities, inadequate protections for survivors of domestic abuse, and an impersonal bureaucracy that overwhelms those it should be there to help. Failures to correct even basic errors grind down those unfortunate enough to be let down by those errors. I want to share one constituent story that exemplifies these failures. For nearly 2 decades, dating back to the days of the old Child Support Agency, she has fought for what her child should have been entitled to. And in all that time, her ex-partner has made consistent payments for just 6 months. After courageously leaving an abusive relationship, she had turned to the CMS for support. Instead, she encountered a system powerless to act when her ex-partner began gaming the system. He claimed to be unemployed while there was evidence that he was working. Missed payments would coincide with birthdays and Christmas, depriving her of the means to make these occasions special for her child. He refused to engage unless she contacted him directly, knowing full well how traumatic this would be given the history of abuse. Her mental health understandably deteriorated. Yet in all her desperate calls to the CMS, rarely did she speak to the same person twice. Someone familiar with her case, someone invested in its resolution. In her words, support consisted of someone, and I quote her here, who read from a screen, then said they will transfer me to someone who can help, but really just put me back in the queue. So she has spent years feeling she is going round in circles without receiving all the payments she should have received for the care of their child. Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope the Minister would agree that this falls well short of what vulnerable families deserve. Give way to it.
Thank you to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I do appreciate it. Does the Honourable Member agree that we need more enforcement, more accurate assessment of non-resident parent income and better joined up working between HMRC and the Department of Work and Pensions? And that if we saw that, it would help both the constituents that he has and whom he's already referred so passionately to, but also parents like my constituent, whose ex-partner is avoiding paying any ongoing child maintenance despite owning multiple properties.
I thank the Honourable Member for her interventions, and I absolutely would agree that that sounds like exactly the sort of reform that we need to see in the system, and things that I will come on to. I'll give way to
Madam Deputy Speaker, could I commend the Honourable Gentleman for St Neots and mid Cambridgeshire for bringing this forward. I spoke to him beforehand. I'd love to say that things were better in Northern Ireland, but they're not one bit better. Indeed, if you look at me, you see that I have no hair. One of the reasons why I have no hair is because this is incredibly stressful. The very things that the Honourable Gentleman has referred to are things that I deal with and my staff deal with regularly. In Northern Ireland, the stats show that Northern Ireland in March last year showed only 54% of parents were paying over 90% of what they owe. It means that 46% of those who should be paying aren't paying. So it's quite clear to me that the system falls down. Single families struggling. Does the member agree that we need an overhaul UK-wide to address these worrying statistics, not just in Northern Ireland, but everywhere in this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland?
Thanks the member for his intervention, and I'll come to more of the national statistics further in my speech, but absolutely those statistics speak to the need for reform. And the constituent I mentioned is far from alone. And it isn't all one way. Paying parents too often find themselves let down by the CMS. Another constituent of mine has spent months battling the service after experiencing a genuine drop in income, despite providing every piece of documentation that he's been asked for. He's been left waiting and waiting for an adjustment to his payment schedule. And I quote him here, "I received a letter that said my request was not valid, but no explanation was given. The letter said I would be referred to an unnamed team that could help me. Almost 2 months later, I have received no contact." It's just another story embodying those failures at the CMS. Now, recently I attended the parliamentary event hosted by Gingerbread, the charity for single-parent families, and the APPG for single-parent families. The testimony shared that day echoed many of these fundamental problems: enforcement failures, dehumanising customer service, and the resulting financial hardship, and, in too many cases, continued abuse.
Let me give way.
I will give way.
I thank the member for St Neots and Cambridgeshire for securing this debate. It's a very important debate. I note that I'm a officer of the APPG on single-parent families, and their recent excellent report from Gingerbread on fixing the CMS noted that where child maintenance is paid, there is a 25% lower child poverty in those families. Would the member agree with me that this work that Gingerbread do is absolutely vital, but also that it's really vital as an important step to solving the problem of child poverty, that we fix this child maintenance service?
I thank the member for his intervention. Absolutely, it's an excellent report by Gingerbread on fixing the CMS, and I think it has a lot of pointers and a lot of excellent statistics about how single-parent families are being let down. I'll actually come on to some of those now. I mean, the government's own child maintenance statistics paint quite a damning picture. 31% of all paying parents made no maintenance payments whatsoever, and a further 12% paid less than 60% of what they owed. And those aren't just statistics, they represent thousands and thousands of children going without. So I do want to ask the Minister directly, how does the government intend to strengthen the CMS's enforcement powers to prevent systemic abuse? And following the recent consultation on improving payment collection and transfer, when can we expect to see the government's response? Over 1 million children nationwide depend on CMS arrangements. Many of these children and their single-parent families lack the financial security they deserve and need. And that brings me to the wider issue of child poverty, an area this government has claimed to prioritise. But it is hard not to question the depth of that commitment when, so far, the government has refused to abolish the two-child benefit cap, and when reform of the CMS seems to have barely featured in policy discussions. The evidence is stark. According to Save the Children, almost half of all children in single-parent families live in poverty, compared to 1 in 4 children in two-parent households. Gingerbread's Fix the CMS report reveals that over 50% of parents not receiving their entitled maintenance struggle to pay essential bills, and nearly half cannot afford basic necessities like clothes, shoes or school uniforms for their children. It should be self-evident that any serious strategy to tackle child poverty must include fundamental reform of the child maintenance service. And so I asked the Minister what progress has been made on the government's child poverty strategy, and has it given appropriate consideration to the reform of the CMS? Now, the challenges for the CMS are numerous and complex, and they beg further questions. Would the government consider reviewing the CMS funding formula to ensure it truly reflects the cost of raising a child? Can the government commit to amending service charges, including the 4% fee for receiving parents, using collect and pay, and the initial £20 enrolment charge? And how can the government improve staff recruitment, retention and training to ensure the workforce can properly support those who depend on this vital service? Those are just some of the questions that the government must consider if it does want to reform the CMS. I know the answers won't be easy, and I do want to thank the Minister for his response in advance, and also thank Mr. Speaker for granting this important debate. And just finally, to acknowledge the contributions and presence of all members that have stayed here today for this adjournment debate. They do understand the gravity of the issue, and I hope the Minister is about to show us that the government do too. Thank you.
I call the Minister, Andrew Weston. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I begin by congratulating the Right Honourable Gentleman for St Neots and Mid-Cambridgeshire on securing what is an incredibly important debate, important to him, important to his constituents, and as I hope I will assure him through my contribution this evening, important to the government too, because far too many children are growing up in poverty, and a key priority for this Labour government is to reduce that number as soon as possible. That is why child maintenance is incredibly important. It is estimated that child maintenance payments keep around 160,000 children out of poverty each year. That has involved the CMS arranging around £1.4 billion in child maintenance payments in the 12 months to September 2024. Tackling child poverty is an urgent priority for the government, and that's why we have already announced our commitments to triple investment in breakfast clubs to over £30 million, roll out free breakfast clubs at all primary schools, create 3,000 additional nurseries and increase the national living wage to £12.21 an hour from April of this year to boost the pay of 3 million workers, many of them parents. The Ministerial Child Poverty Task Force, to which he referred, is working to publish a child poverty strategy later this year, which will deliver lasting change. In developing the strategy, the task force is exploring all available levers for reducing child poverty across 4 key themes: increasing incomes, reducing essential costs, increasing financial resilience, and better local support, especially in the early years. Of course.
I thank the Minister for giving way. You mentioned that the task force would look at all options, and I just wondered if the Minister might be able to comment on whether that would include removing and scrapping the 2-child benefit cap too.
As I said, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the Honourable Gentleman for Harrogate will have heard me do so, we are looking at all available levers, and that across those 4 areas. So we rule nothing in, we rule nothing out, but I understand the point that he is making. But in returning to the CMS specifically, I want to acknowledge that we are aware of the challenges that the service faces. We recognise there is scope for improvement, and the ministerial team as a whole are committed to making those improvements. Moving on to what we are doing about those issues, I'd like to turn to the recent direct pay consultation. Again, he referred to this, and provide some background to the proposed reforms. My party have long called for reforms to the direct pay service, stating that it does not work for all parents. For this reason, this government extended the direct pay consultation launched by the last government with the express purpose of gathering as much feedback from stakeholders as was possible. We are looking closely at the feedback received and will publish the government response in due course. I do appreciate that the Honourable Gentleman would ask for a more specific timeline, but I hope that he would appreciate that in what is an incredibly delicate area, dealing with vulnerable children, vulnerable families, and strained relationships, we want to take our time and make sure that we get those changes right. The consultation itself... Of course.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He will know that getting it right for the most vulnerable children is very important, and we're increasingly seeing post-separation abuse and post-separation financial abuse coming to light in a lot of these cases. Indeed, the report from Gingerbread that I cited earlier says that 45% of people who report post-separation financial abuse say that it gets worse when the CMS is involved. And I hope that any report into the work of the CMS in tackling and supporting vulnerable families will look at this question and will help us get some answers on that issue.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. He has a long history not just of working on CMS issues but on child poverty more broadly, and his expertise I know are of great value to this House. I want to assure him, and I will say a little more around domestic abuse and financial abuse later in my contribution, that the focus that we had in that consultation on the proposed abolition of direct pay is intended as a specific response to that issue. I have seen some appalling examples in the cases that have crossed my desk as a minister of people who are able to message their former partner in the form of a comment on a bank transaction. So they will transfer a penny because they have a direct payment in place, along with an abusive term or some form of triggering harassment of a former victim of theirs, showing that actually, whilst a parent may have moved away from that unsafe and dangerous environment, they are never fully away where direct pay is engaged. I can see the honourable gentleman for Strangford trying to come in. I will beat him to it and give way.
I thank the Minister for, and I expect from the Minister we're going to have a positive response to the honourable gentleman and all our queries, because that's the Minister we have in front of us. I know that to happen. Minister, one of the things that really frustrates me, frustrates us all, you see, whenever one of my constituents come to me and they say to me, look, I get a different person every time I phone up. I have to tell them the same story over and over again. And then you go back 2 weeks later and the person you were speaking to 2 weeks before, they're away as well. There must be some way within DWP that we can have a specific case officer that looks after something, and that case officer needs to respond to the person who is asking them. I know these are things that the Minister understands, but honestly, it's so simple to sort out. At least it seems to me to be simple, but we really need something on behalf of all our constituents. Thanks so much.
I absolutely understand the point that the honourable gentleman is making, with specific reference to named caseworkers initially for victims of domestic abuse. I'll have something further to say in my contribution that he, I think, will welcome. All speakers should do so, but I take the point more generally that he is making also. But if I may make some progress, Madam Deputy Speaker, just to say that the proposals also sought, turning to this issue of direct pay and domestic violence, financial abuse, etc. Proposals also sought views on collection fees and explored how victims and survivors of domestic abuse can be better supported, which is so important given the sort of issues raised by the honourable gentleman in opening the debate when he cited the case of his own constituent. Overall, work is ongoing to establish the steps needed to really improve the service, taking account of the views of parents. These will be set out in that response to the consultation. I appreciate he would like that to be as soon as possible, and I will take that away. But just to drill down on that issue of domestic abuse, Madam Deputy Speaker, the scale of violence against women and girls in our country is intolerable, and this government will treat it as the national emergency that it is. Yeah. Our manifesto included the mission to halve violence against women and girls in a decade. We were right to do so, and I know all ministers are focused on making that a reality. If I may just say, therefore, a little about the support that should be available, and if he wants to share specific details of the case that he referenced with me, I will take it away, because the support that should be available is extensive and runs contrary to what has clearly happened in the case that he outlined. So we have overseen progress in providing support, the continued rollout of an operational team to deliver targeted support to parents subjected to the most challenging and complex domestic abuse. The team provide a tailored and discreet service to customers, which is incredibly important, giving regular progress updates, and can and do assign a named caseworker to prevent customers having to retell their story at each interaction. As the honourable gentleman from Stretford was saying, that can be incredibly stressful for parents using the service. The caseworkers are trained to identify and refer appropriate cases within the Collect and Pay service to that team, and more generally the Child Maintenance Service consulted on a diverse range of stakeholders to review its domestic abuse training for all frontline CMS staff to ensure caseworkers understand, recognise and respond appropriately to customers who are experiencing domestic abuse or who are survivors of domestic abuse. Of course.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way, and I congratulate the honourable gentleman for securing this debate. Like him, I've had a number of examples of people in Newcastle Lyme who've come to me with stories of being ignored, of being let down, of being left behind by this agency. And the sooner, I say to the Minister, the sooner that the failures of this agency are dealt with, the better for people, not just in Newcastle Lyme, but clearly up and down our United Kingdom. With that in mind, will the Minister find time to meet with me to talk about the specific examples that my constituents have faced? And he's touched on the point about this is an equality and a safety issue. That's very much the situation in my patch of the people who came to my surgery. So I'd be grateful in the spirit with which he's approached this debate so far if he'd find time to meet me to discuss these points.
I should have known, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the honourable gentleman would be in his place. He is keen on an adjournment debate. We all know that. This is where I out myself as an imposter, Madam Deputy Speaker, because I am not the Minister with direct responsibility for the Child Maintenance Service, but I'm very happy to put him in touch with the Department's Minister for the Lords, who I am sure would be happy to have a conversation with him. Turning back to the honourable gentleman and the points that he made about calculation reforms, a broad review of the child maintenance calculation is being conducted, which is examining the scope for change and improvements while maintaining the simplicity of the calculation. It can be very frustrating, I know, for paying parents who are waiting to have income reassessed, and indeed receiving parents when they are aware that a paying parent has received a substantial income increase. The calculation at present generally looks at income from the previous tax year, and it is only at present when somebody's income has changed with a divergence of more than 25% in either direction that it would trigger an in-year evaluation. So we are looking at ways that we can change that whilst recognising that we need to encourage payment compliance and more sustainable arrangements in all that we do. He will be pleased to hear that the £20 application fee that he referred to was removed in 2024, getting rid of a financial barrier to parents wishing to access the CMS. Proposals to include more types of taxable income held by HMRC within the standard maintenance calculation are being considered alongside the review of the child maintenance calculation. Turning to enforcement, and my honourable friend from Congleton raised this also, I can understand that for some receiving parents there are frustrations with how quickly the CMS secures payment from non-compliant paying parents. We have seen significant improvements to speed up action when payments first break down and to target enforcement action more effectively. We are changing the process at present to make direct deductions something that we can do more swiftly where issues emerge. We do have a range of strong enforcement powers that can be used against those who consistently refuse to meet their obligations to provide financial support to their children. And in the past year to September 2024, the CMS has collected £16.8 million from paying parents with civil enforcement actions in process. Collections through civil enforcement have followed a general upwards trajectory in recent years, and for comparison, the equivalent figure in 2021 was £10.3 million. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to finish by talking about the improvements to customer experience and digital services that the Department have been introducing since 2020 as part of the DWP Service Modernisation Programme. The Department has transformed the ways in which customers can interact with the CMS, providing customers with the choice to make contact through digital routes and reducing the time taken to action change of circumstances. We continue to develop our digital offer, evaluating through user research and customer feedback, but we are committed to retaining a non-digital telephony service to ensure no customer is excluded. Madam Deputy Speaker, I recognise, as I said earlier, that the honourable gentleman is rightly impatient, as are other members, to see change and the detail of our reform package following the conclusion of the recent consultation. But getting that right solution will take a little time. It's right that the changes that we make are properly considered and robust, so that the CMS can not just continue to play an important role, but to play an ever more effective and increasingly important role in supporting children and tackling child poverty.
The question is, this House do now adjourn? As many of the opinions say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.